It's Thursday, and that means it is Lettermen Live, presented by Wendy's. You know the drill, Andy Backstrom. You've had Wendy's nugs dipped in sauce, but have you had them covered in sauce? Wendy's new saucy nugs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love and turn them up to 11. Choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parm, or if you're a real heat seeker like Mr. Backstrom over there, try spicy ghost pepper on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. I dare you. That's 7 delicious ways to try the nugs you already love. Pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's got to be Wendy's, a participating U.S. Wendy's. If you've had Wendy's saucy nugs, let us know in the comments. I'd love to hear some feedback on what everybody thinks of them. I'd also love to hear some feedback on how Andy Backstrom's day is going. Andy, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited to get to Chicago. I spent some time there a few years ago living there, and I'm just really excited to see the skyline. I feel like driving from Ohio to Chicago really isn't that bad of a drive. I'm really excited to see how many Ohio State fans are at Wrigley Field. I think the capacity for the stadium, at least for baseball games, is around 41,600. Something around that ballpark, no pun intended. But I think that it'll probably be around 38,000 or so Ohio State fans. That's just my estimation. I wasn't told that number. It's just if I'm going to guess, that's probably where I'd put the number at.
The official attendance last year for the Iowa game, Iowa Northwestern at Wrigley Field, was 38,000, just 38,000 flat. I assume that was an estimation because unless they legitimately made sure that it was capped like directly at 38,000, which I very much doubt. I think that it's probably going to be around that number. So I would say 25,000 Ohio State fans, 20,000 Ohio State. I think it'll be majority Ohio State for what it's worth.
Oh, wow. So you think it'll be less than what I think? You're thinking like 20 to 25.
Yeah, well, because I do think I don't think Northwestern has a big fan base, but this is the kind of game that Northwestern's fan base will want to be at because it's at Wrigley Field and they don't do this often. I know they're playing Illinois there in a couple weeks, but I do think that fan base will at least want to be there. But Ohio State fans will want to be there a little more. And so
yeah, that's probably fair.
I think you're selling your all short there.
It's an excuse to get to Wrigleyville. That's for sure.
Yeah, if nothing else.
And honestly, I think it's a good thing this is 11 a.m. local kick, 12 p.m. noon Eastern time, because if you go to the game, you have the full day afterwards to explore Chicago, or, if you have family there or whatever, to use the day. If it was a 3:30 game or something like that, it would probably take you into the nighttime area where it's getting dark so early these days that you really, you might not want to spend the night downtown. So I think it's good that it's at 11 a.m. I kind of like this one. Plus it's Big Ten Network, not Big Noon. So it's not the same folks calling the game every week that we'll have for the next 2 weeks after that.
Yeah. And there's still quite a few. Our friends over at Game Time still have a lot of tickets available for this game for like 110 to 130 bucks. And there's some obviously more expensive tickets, but if you're still on the fence about going, get off the fence and bring yourself over to Wrigley Field. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited for it. I wrote about it a little bit on Monday, setting the table for the week, that Wrigley kind of holds a little bit of a special place because, I just have a very, very strong memory with my dad at Wrigley Field. I think it's going to be really cool to cover a game there because I've only been there twice. I'm sure you've had some experiences there, some experiences in Wrigleyville. Yeah, raise those eyebrows. I saw that. Some experiences in Wrigleyville. I just think it's going to be a really cool weekend. And we'll get into keys of the game and everything. I just wanted to, start off with a little bit of talk about Wrigley. It's going to be cool.
Yeah, it's especially cool for Carnell Tate to go back home to Chicago. It's where he's from. He played a lot of his high school ball elsewhere, but did start his high school career there, grew up there. We don't need to get into his past, but still an emotional return for him going back to Chicago and playing there. And I thought it was interesting what Ryan Day said today on his radio show, talking about how they want to win this game for Carnell Tate. And, it's one thing for a team to get ready for a top 5 matchup, like they'll have the following week against Indiana, like they had earlier this season against Oregon and Penn State. But I think Ryan Day does a really good job of finding messages for his team that aren't stale. Like he finds new things to get his team to rally around. And it feels like one of those things this week, along with, the trip to Indianapolis is on the line. A new one this week is, hey, we should get this for Carnell Tate. Let's all play really well. Let's win this one handily for a guy who's from this city, who has gone through a lot the last couple of years and is going back home. And let's do this for him. I think it's just something to point out that I appreciate, as someone who covers this team, that sometimes head coaches, they don't always find those storylines or narratives to help motivate their teams. And I think it's interesting that Ryan Day does that. It's something that doesn't get lost on me, I guess.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I think that's kind of cool. I did want to kick this thing off before we get to the keys, and I'm glad you brought up the Carnell Tate angle. I also think that it is still worth it to, make note of the message that Ryan Day is sending program-wide, not just, win one for Carnell because he's going home, and this is probably the only time in his career he's going to get to play in his hometown. So he gets to the NFL, of course, and I think he'll have a long career in the NFL, so, be able to do that. Nathan, glad you're going to the game. If you see Lettermen Row, come say hi, please. Be a great time to say hi. I thought Ryan Day's quote on Wednesday night was really cool. Our own 41-year vet Tim May asked him about the defense, and he was talking about the defense, but I think it holds true for the entire roster. And I'm just going to read the Ryan Day quote. We don't do this very often on this program, but I think this one is worth it. He said, "It's November, and in November, you've got to play your best football. If we're having conversations about, well, we've got to get up for this game, that's craziness because we're late in the season. This is the playoffs. Everything is on the line here. Opportunities to get to Indianapolis is on the line here. And we're playing in November, and we've got to play our best football in November. So I'm expecting, just like everyone else on the team, that they're going to play at a high level on Saturday." You hear him say that, and as an Ohio State fan, that should give you some goosebumps. Last year he talked about the slow build to the Michigan game. And it wasn't hey, we got to play well in November. It's hey, we need to be playing our best when we play Michigan. And this year it's hey, it's November. If we're not playing well in November, he said that's craziness. Not a word that I've ever heard him say. And I think maybe it's like that New York Times Twitter account where it tells you the first time they've ever used a word in the newspaper. That's the first time I've ever heard Ryan Day use that word, craziness. So, I just thought that was noteworthy. He's sending a message there, obviously, through the media. And I understand when coaches do that. Coaches do that across the country and around sports all the time. But I thought that it was pretty clear that Ryan Day is kind of setting the tone for what he wants this thing to be this week, even though it's a sleepy 11 a.m. kickoff in a baseball stadium against an average Big Ten team.
Well, they can't slip up. Look how many teams have slipped up against inferior opponents this season across college football, especially in the SEC, which, it's a whole nother conversation. But there's been a lot of in-conference violence between teams that you're not seeing win as many games. I mean, even Kentucky, Ole Miss earlier in the season, obviously Vanderbilt, beating Alabama. You have, teams losing games that normally they don't lose. And there's been a lot of other close calls, and Ohio State had one of those for itself against Nebraska, a 21-17 game. And I think that was, I wouldn't call it a wake-up call at all. And I know they didn't call it that either. It's a reminder that anyone in your conference can beat you on any given day. So they are trying to get through the rest of the season without a loss, period. And even though they could probably make the college football playoff with 2 losses, they can't make the Big Ten championship. And every time we're in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, the last Big Ten championship banner is a game against Northwestern that was played in 2020. And these programs look very different since then. It's been a long time. And every time we talk about this, every time they go to Lucas Oil Stadium for Big Ten media days, that's not supposed to be the only time that they are there for the season. Yeah. And so there is this huge sense of urgency to make the Big Ten championship. And I think that is more of the mindset and goal right now than anything about Michigan. I think it's also important to note that Michigan is 5-5 right now. This is not the same Michigan of the last 3 years that won the Big Ten. And of course, last year won the national championship. And if we're going to be honest, was probably just more talented than Ohio State in 2023 on paper. So, that argument, I think. You had 13 guys go to the NFL draft.
I know. Yeah, I just bold to say that to this audience.
Well, I mean, look, it's besides the point now. They have a very different team. They're 5-5. They're struggling. Ohio State should beat them really handily, in my opinion. Like, you should. But Indiana's first.
Yeah.
And Northwestern's before that. And you can't skip ahead. And look, as much as they want to get in and get out at Wrigley Field, like, they got to get out of there healthy, because Indiana's going to give you everything they have. And that's going to be a top 5 matchup. So I think it's funny when you look at the strength of schedule. A lot of people kind of scoffed at what Ohio State had to go through this year. It felt like, oh, well, it's just the Oregon game and maybe the Penn State game they'll have to worry about. Well, now the Indiana game is that third one that's going to be also a top 5 matchup for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? That it's Indiana, just because of the helmet. It's not because Indiana, you know what I'm trying to say. Indiana as a program is not traditionally, actually never, ever have they been a 10-win program. They're already that. So, it's just kind of crazy. But it's Northwestern first. And I think that this all goes back to, and it's going to be my first key to the game, is Ryan Day has this thing now that they're doing where they stack a brick every day. Denzel Burke put the first brick in after the Oregon game to set the tone for the second half of the season after he had a really bad game against Oregon. I thought that was really noteworthy. I can't remember who said that, but it was after the bye week. They talked about Denzel being able to do that. They pick a guy after practice every day who puts a brick in. And Ryan Day said that it's not just to add a brick to the top of the pile. You have to make sure that it's lined up perfectly. You got to make sure that it is setting the foundation every single day. And I think this game in particular, and it's why my score prediction on lettermenrow.com on Friday is kind of a low total, is that I think this is a brick stacking game. Like, this is a professional, hard hat, workmanlike, lunch pail, all those superlatives that you want to put on it, all the adverbs you want to describe it with. Go in there, take care of business, and get home. Because you got 2 huge ones coming up, but you can't get to them until you do take care of business. You don't have to win this game by 50. You don't have to win this game by 40. Go in there, take care of your business, play good defense, run the damn ball, get back home. And I think that's the key, is just like, be a good team. What do good teams do to a team like Northwestern on the road? They take care of business. Whether it's ugly, whether it's pretty, it doesn't matter. Just take care of business. And I think does that make sense? Like, I'm not saying like win the game, because that's a key to the game. Like, of course it is. A big dumb football guy could tell you that. But like, I just think it's very much like have a business-like approach. Go in there, take care of your business, get home.
Yeah. Let's get into the keys then. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Give me your first.
Well, I guess that kind of is my first, but I guess I'll go then to play good defense. Like, defense travels. Ohio State's defense has traveled twice this year. It did not travel the other game against Oregon. It traveled to Michigan State without Tyleik Williams. It didn't look that great, but they got opportune turnovers, which really helped them. And then they were able to, capitalize on them and win that game pretty easily. Against Penn State, the defense traveled better than it has maybe in the last 2 or 3 years. Against Oregon, it didn't. So you're 2-1 right now when your defense travels. Are you going to set the tone for this game and keep Northwestern out of the end zone for for the third straight game that you've kept an opponent out of the end zone? Or are you going to make this thing kind of get sideways and let Northwestern stick around? Because the longer that you do that in a weird setting, on a weird playing surface, in a weird stadium with a weird opponent, weird things are going to happen. So take the weird out of it, play good defense. I think that's my first key.
I'm going to go with Will Howard. Do not turn the ball over for a second game in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would be good for him to build some momentum going into a huge game against Indiana, where you don't want to give possessions away, certainly in a top 5 matchup. But look, he didn't turn the ball over at all against Oregon, but against Penn State, of course, had the fumble into the end zone, touchback, and then before that, the pick 6 that gave Penn State its only touchdown of the game. And before last week's game against Purdue, he had an interception in 5 of his 6 previous games. So he's been really good this year overall. I mean, people can nitpick the deep ball, which is valid. I think he needs to improve in that category. People can say, that maybe he hasn't always been as explosive, maybe in the run game, or you can nitpick again. That's my point. But overall, he's been very good. One thing that I do think he needs to get better at is just having these clean games completely. Because like, as we get on season, those games against the top 5 teams, you just can't really afford that. Like, the defense played so well against Penn State. They got away with it, but those things didn't cost them. But against Oregon, like, one turnover would have cost them. Like, they already lost a possession on that onside kick. Imagine if Will Howard had thrown an interception in that game. Maybe we're not even talking about a game that comes down to the wire. Maybe Oregon pulls away a little bit in that game. So, as we get into Big Ten championship territory and college football playoff, I think, Ohio State needs to see more of these performances from Will Howard where he can go stretches of games without turning the football over.
Well, and if he does that, I mean, if he doesn't turn the ball over and he plays well against an Indiana team that has a really good defense as it pertains to, the advanced metrics and stats, a Northwestern team that, if nothing else, plays pretty sound and solid defense, and they have for 2 decades or 3 decades now. And then Michigan, who, if nothing else, has a decent defense and a great defensive line. Then he goes into the Oregon game and plays really well and doesn't turn the ball over, and they get revenge on Oregon, and Dylan Gabriel and him split those matchups, and they have similar statistics. Like, he still has a chance to play his way to whatever award you want to put his name on. Like, I don't think people realize that because he's nowhere near the conversation right now. Like, it's not just a foregone conclusion that he's just out of all of these awards. He's got opportunities, and you want to talk about Heisman moments? Like, there's some moments to be had at the tail end of this schedule. So, like, I completely agree. Like, if he's turnover free in this game and continues to get his stats looking good in a game like this, and you go into those big time matchups, you start to prove yourself, people are going to notice because you're on the number 2 team in the country. And if you go beat the number 1 team in the country in 3 weeks in the Dome, I don't know. He could be in New York. I don't think that's out of the equation. So, yeah, I love that. I think that's a great one because we expect Ohio State to win this game no matter what. But, Will Howard staying clean and keeping his stat line clean would be a huge boost for this team.
Yeah, because we know just one thing I want to add too. Like, we know he can respond to mistakes, but there's going to be a time where, you can respond, but it might be too little too late. And that's not going to be this game, but maybe it's in the playoff. Yeah. So you need to get in the habit of, and no one's perfect, but having a couple consecutive performances without one was important, I think, for him going forward.
Yeah, just to show that you can do it.
Yeah.
You can have a turnover-free game against a non-MAC opponent. You can do that.
Yeah, right.
Because he hadn't had one. He had a turnover in every game other than the first 2, which were against the MAC teams, which is kind of bizarre, but then all of a sudden he makes Purdue look like a MAC team, which, I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Kind of a MAC team. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I'm in a good mood. You can't tell. I'll go to another key to the game. I think this offensive line, and I wrote about this for Friday at lettermenrow.com. I'll give the people a little bit of a sneak peek into the final thoughts that are going to be over on the website that come with the staff picks. Ohio State will have a decent test. Northwestern is 16th nationally against the run. They're allowing 108.1 yards per game on the ground. So Northwestern is 16th against the run this year. It's the worst run defense they'll see in the next 3 weeks. So next week they host Indiana, which is the number 1 rushing defense in college football, which is crazy, but they only average allowing 72 yards a game on the ground. And then Michigan is 12th nationally. They allow 102.4 yards per game on the ground. This is a good test for this Ohio State ground game, not because Northwestern is really, really good against the run. It's because they're really sound against the run. If you're not on your blocks, they're going to drop you for a 1 or 2 yard gain. It's not like they're super athletic and they're going to beat you around the edge and they're going to, stifle your run game when you're trying to run to the outside. It's like if you try to run up the middle or you try to run between the tackles, like they're just going to make life hard and make you grind out drives. If you can get 5, 6, 7 yards a pop on this Northwestern defense, it's over. Like there's not much they can do because they're not athletic enough to handle that. But they're super sound, and whatever you think about Pat Fitzgerald, like this defense has a Pat Fitzgerald feel to it. Like they just make you grind things out, and that's why teams don't run the ball well on them. Is because you're in 3rd and 6 and you got to throw the ball because you've got 1 yard on first down and 3 yards on second down. All of a sudden it's 3rd and 6. You got to throw the ball. Like I think they make you grind it out, and if Ohio State can make it to where Northwestern can't make them grind it out, I think that's a huge win for this run game going into 2 weeks where you're going to need the run game to be really good, just flat out because those 2 run defenses you're about to see the next 2 weeks are just really freaking good.
Yeah, I really like Northwestern's linebackers. So they're pretty active
Yeah.
in the run defense department. And I think you're right. I think this will be a game where we'll get to again evaluate the offensive line and how especially that left side is doing. That's going to be a constant evaluation as it was last year. I mean, the whole line was, and to a certain degree this year as well. But since the Josh Simmons injury and then the Zem Mahalski episode, and now with Donovan Jackson and Carson Hinsman, I feel like it's just a constant, okay, where are they at? Where are they at now? How are they doing now? And I think that's fair because that is really when Josh Simmons went down, it was like this could decide the season. I think we did like a midseason awards or forecasting for the rest of the year. And I think you even picked like Zem Mahalski is one of the three most important players for the rest of the year, which sounds silly now because he's out. But at the time, it made a lot of sense. I think what you were just picking was whoever's left tackle, going forward. And, now it's Donovan Jackson. So I'd let you have Donovan Jackson as a replacement there for that pick. I feel like that's fair. But yeah, I mean, that's the offensive line is going to be under the microscope again for this game. Another key I have is stopping the quarterback run. I think at times for Ohio State this year, it's been a problem. We think back to the Nebraska game. It felt like Dylan Raiola had his most success scrambling for yards, especially in the first half. And then Drew Aller, that first Penn State drive, kind of gave Ohio State a bit of a headache scrambling for first downs as well. And again, as a defense, you're not going to be perfect. Like a big reason why he was scrambling was because there was nothing open downfield. But, for quarterbacks that have the ability, which most do nowadays, you have to be accounting for that. And I think that's something that can kill you, especially late in games. And again, maybe not this game, but I think this is a game where you're trying to tighten down the hatches for the future games. So Jack Lausch is their quarterback. They had Mike Wright at the beginning of the year. They pivoted from Mike Wright to Jack Lausch. He's averaging 8.7 rushing attempts per game. So they like to run him a little bit. He's a dual threat guy. And, he doesn't really push the ball effectively downfield through the air. So a lot of teams, when they play Ohio State, they try to slow things down and they try to attack them on the run. I wouldn't be surprised if that's Northwestern's strategy in this game. So just trying down on the ground, I think, 4 or 5 yards past the line of scrimmage at most is probably the goal for this defense. I think, thinking back to the last time they played Northwestern, we saw a lot of the quarterback run because it was so windy. I think regardless of the elements, you're going to see it on Saturday.
Yeah, they benched Mike Wright because he just wasn't any good.
Was not good.
No, like actively bad. So Jack Lausch, I think, has been decent. Would you say decent?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he was like planned to be the guy this year. I think they were hoping that Mike Wright would pay off considering his experience transferring in from Mississippi State. And, this was his 5th or 6th year of his college football career. They were hoping for that to hit, but Lausch is interesting. I was saying this in one of our other videos. He actually was originally committed to play baseball at Notre Dame, and he was going to walk on to the football team at Notre Dame as well. But he got the scholarship offer to play football at Northwestern. He's a Chicago guy. He was actually the 2021 Chicago Sun-Times Player of the Year. He had more than 3,000 yards of scrimmage that year, 20 touchdowns through the air, 21 touchdowns on the ground. So again, dual threat guy, can run, but not like a 5-star prospect or anything. But Northwestern usually doesn't have that at quarterback. But like you said, they play sound really on both sides of the ball, and they can get things going on the ground. I mean, I feel like when Northwestern's had its most success, it's played off the run game with the pass. So they like to set things up with the run, and I figure that'll be the game plan against Ohio State, because I feel like Ohio State, outside of the Oregon game, which feels like more and more like an outlier. I mean, I don't know if we want to say that, but it does feel like that as far as the way their defense played. And otherwise, it feels like they've been more susceptible against the run than they have the pass.
Yeah.
I feel like that's fair to say.
Yeah, I think that's fair. For what it's worth, Mike Wright started at Vanderbilt, then went to Mississippi State. Now he's at Northwestern. Another, for what it's worth, Northwestern did have a 5-star quarterback at one time. It was Hunter Johnson, the former 5-star quarterback, who started at Clemson.
Did not pay off.
Transferred in, he was terrible.
Yes.
Mike Wright, also terrible. So now it's Jack Lausch. So now Ohio State has that challenge. Yeah, I just think and I guess I'm circling back like it's a business meeting to stopping the run, running game. Ohio State needs to be able to run the ball, but they, like you said, they also have to stop the run because the next two teams want to run the ball at you as well. Indiana wants to run the ball. Michigan can exclusively run the ball. They can't pass. So, this is a good test. I'm excited to see what this defense does. I'm excited to see what this ground game does. Everything has a tilt to looking forward to Indiana, to looking forward to Michigan, looking forward to a potential rematch against Oregon because you think you're going to win all these games. And so we're not really looking at it in a vacuum of like, okay, what did Ohio State do against Northwestern? It's like, okay, here's what happened against Northwestern. Here's why it translates. Here's what happened against Northwestern. Here's why they need to worry about this heading into, like, last thing from me on the keys, and we'll get into some nugget meters here after that. You know what I'm talking about. If I think they need to make sure, and I don't think Northwestern's good at this, but no deep balls. No deep balls, nothing down the field, no passes near the sideline, down the field at all. Indiana's going to back shoulder the ever-loving you-know-what out of you. And Michigan's only hope is throwing like flea flickers down the field. If Denzel Burke and Davison Igbinosun have a good game in this game, I'll feel much more confident. Even though it's against Northwestern, I don't care. I just want a confidence builder for those guys if I'm an Ohio State fan or if I'm Ohio State. So nothing down the field, no trick plays that catch you off guard and get your corners napping out there. I think the corners need to have a good game just to continue to build momentum. They were good against Penn State. I thought they were decent last week. Denzel Burke gave up a long pass, and Davison Igbinosun had yet another penalty. They were really good against Penn State because Penn State's receivers are bad. Decent last week. I think they need to have a good game in this game to start to get that ball rolling, start to get some confidence ahead of Indiana, not really for Michigan, but then against, obviously, Oregon.
That's the difficult thing is that Denzel Burke has that troubling performance against Oregon, and it feels like there really isn't a barometer or an appropriate way to measure where he's at until they play Indiana, probably.
Man, I just wish that they had I really do wish that they played Maryland this year because I don't think that Ty Felton is as good as Evan Stewart, but I think he's better than anything Michigan has and better than most of the receivers, if not all of the receivers that Indiana has. And he's one of the five most he's one of the top 5 in yardage in college football this year. He was in my top 10 that I just had to submit for the Blitnikoff Award. He's a good receiver. I wish that they played them between Oregon 1 and Oregon 2. So I'd be like, okay, Denzel's improved. Because right now I really have no clue.
Right, yeah, because you look at the schedule, and we were even talking about this after the Oregon game. We're like, when will we be really able to evaluate? I mean, obviously, if he was giving up chunks of yardage against Nebraska and, against Penn State and Purdue and all that stuff, there would be concern, certainly. But it's almost like, maybe a little unfair to him that we can't really say that he's there yet or where he needs to be, just because there have been a few deep balls, whether they've been, near catches. Like there was the one against Nebraska that felt like it was almost a catch, called not a catch, probably could have been called for defensive pass interference as well. And there's been other times too where it's like, there was another time in that game, I believe, where almost gave up a touchdown but got the tackle right at the 1-yard line. So it's not credited with giving up the touchdown there. So he's been fine. It's just that, like you're saying, we don't really know yet. And it's interesting because before the season, I think the cornerbacks, you probably had maybe even more confidence in the cornerbacks than the safeties. Yeah. Whereas right now, it feels like the Ohio State safeties are at a higher level than the Ohio State cornerbacks. And it feels like the corners have to catch up. Because when I'm thinking of the safeties, I'm back to including Jordan Hancock in the safety category. Yeah. Because now they're actually playing him some at deep safety, even since Lathan Ransom has come back. So I felt like last season, Jordan Hancock was a corner. Okay, that's a nickel corner. Now I'm like, okay, it's kind of back to the 3 safety system that Jim Knowles has talked about. So you think about Jordan Hancock and Caleb Downs and, of course, Lathan Ransom, that's a pretty darn good trio. And it does feel like you would want Davison Igbinosun and Denzel Burke to kind of catch up to that level of play. And again, that's being hypercritical because they have been pretty good. Davison Igbinosun made one of the plays of the game against Penn State. and Denzel Burke has been fine. Like, he hasn't been bad since the Oregon game.
The weirdest thing, though, even more weird than like we don't know how good these guys are because there's nobody like Oregon on their schedule. Ohio State and Oregon have the two best. Oh, okay. Hold on. Let me. I'm gonna get to that, but we're gonna rate it. We're gonna rate it after this. You've had Wendy's nugs dipped in sauce, Andy. Have you had them covered in sauce? Because Wendy's new spicy nugs take the crispy and spice. The new saucy nugs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love and turn them up to 11. Choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parma. If you're a real heat seeker, you can try that spicy ghost pepper only on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. I dare you. Will just got here. Try the spicy nugs. I dare you. That's 7 delicious ways to try the nugs you already love. Pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's got to be Wendy's at participating U.S. Wendy's. Andy, I have a take. I want you to rate it. Your choices are buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parm, spicy nugs, or spicy nugs with the spicy ghost pepper sauce on them. Okay, so we're going to add an extra layer in there. So Ohio State, this is not even Northwestern centric, but it's a decent conversation, and I'll get us back to Northwestern, I promise. We got 14 more minutes here, and then we're going to get out of here. Ohio State, we don't know how good the corners are because Northwestern doesn't have a lot of guys who are going to challenge them. Indiana, I think, will challenge them, but it's not the way that Oregon did. Michigan won't challenge them at all at receiver. I think it's going to look a lot like the Penn State game. Then they'll play Oregon again. That receiving core will challenge them. Is there another receiver core in the country, Andy? I don't think – here's my spicy take. I don't think there's another receiving core in the country that can challenge them at all this season, even if they win the national championship game. It's Oregon, a drop-off, then Indiana, a drop-off, then everyone else.
I mean, I would have to do some more homework on that. I mean, I feel like that's a saucy. I'm going to give you the saucy meter on that because that is a take that no one would challenge them at all. I mean, I feel like you have some squads down there in the SEC that would maybe give them some problems.
So Tennessee's passing game sucks.
Yeah, I'm not thinking of Tennessee.
Georgia's passing game sucks. Carson Beck's doing Carson Beck football giveaway night. Like every time they take the field, it's crazy. It's like a promotion at a baseball game. Texas has Isaiah Bond, but that's one guy. That's not like a receiving core that's going to challenge the entire secondary. Alabama has Ryan Williams and quite literally nothing else. Like it's a deep ball to Ryan Williams. It's a run play by Jalen Milroe, or they're punting.
Yeah. Well, what I will say is if LSU sneaks in somehow, if there's like chaos on chaos,
okay, all right.
C sneaks a team in,
okay,
they do have Kyron Lacey as well as Aaron Anderson, who that duo is probably pretty dangerous.
And then I will give you maybe Miami because Restrepo and a couple of those other guys out wide. I still don't think it's anything close to what they've seen at Oregon.
Yeah, I mean,
Oregon is the best that they will see all year. And the only reason that because of that is because Ohio State can't play against Ohio State.
I think Texas would challenge them.
Okay.
Because they also have, can you group in Gunnar Helm like as a tight end? Are we grouping tight ends into this conversation?
I mean, maybe, but then you're talking linebackers too, trying to defend with linebackers.
Well, even Matthew Golden's a pretty good wide receiver option too.
Yeah, he's good. Okay.
So I think Texas should be involved in that conversation. I think LSU would really scare me if they hadn't lost as many games as they already have, and we're finding a way into the playoff. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting discussion. It's like, but and you never know though. Like in playoff games too, random receivers come out of nowhere and make incredible plays.
Yeah, I remember Xavier Johnson had a touchdown against Georgia.
Yeah, and I'm sure in prepping for that game, the Georgia reporters weren't like keying in on Xavier Johnson, who probably had 10 catches that year. Everyone at Ohio State knew what he was capable of because of earlier in the season against Notre Dame, but I don't know.
All right, so we'll give my receivers take and I guess it's a secondary take. A spicy ghost pepper covered saucy or spicy nug.
Yeah, that was pretty spicy.
Do you have a hot take? If you don't, that's okay. If you have a saucy take, I will rate it. But if you don't, that's okay. We'll move on. and finish out the show here.
I don't know if this is like a spicy take, but I really feel like they needed the loss to Oregon. And maybe it's not like a wake-up call of like, oh, you need to lose a game. It's more of like in a season this long, I think we're going to look back in a few years, and whether it's 12 teams or 14, because they're going to keep expanding this thing, I don't know if we're going to get an undefeated team to win this thing like in a long time. I mean, I don't know if that's going to happen. Like, I really feel like with injuries and the way this structure is right now, you're probably best off dropping a game somewhere, figure out what you're bad at. I mean, they've completely redid the defense basically. Like they've almost said we built it from scratch again, right?
Yeah.
So like if you don't have that and there's some issues that are masked, and even like you get out of there with the game-winning kick and you get the slide down, like I don't know if that benefits them going forward. I don't know if that, yeah, you're undefeated at this point. You're the number one team in the country, but like it's still we haven't had that game where the luck didn't bounce our way. Like there's almost like this like juju kind of, I don't really believe in karma or anything like that, but it's like there is an element of luck to winning a championship, and like they had some bad luck against Oregon. And it's like you got it out, you almost got it out of the way. And I know that sounds very like, I don't know, faith-based or like silly, but there's something about championships that certain things you look back on and you're like, yeah, I feel like that team needed that. And I think my take right now would just be like, I felt it at the time when they lost too. Like you probably needed that. Like you probably needed that in hindsight.
Well, everybody looks at the Michigan team from last year, but like, who's to say Michigan doesn't take a loss in the middle of the season if it had anything that resembled an Oregon on the schedule in the middle of the season? Their entire middle of the schedule, their entire October was Minnesota, a bad Indiana team that fired its coach, a Michigan State team whose coach was doing ungodly acts on the phone, and so they fired him too. And then they had a bye week. Then they played Purdue. Like their middle of the season was horrible, like absolutely horrible. They didn't have anything like that. And by the time November rolled around, they were playing at max capacity. So like, of course they went 15-0. Like they were just able to steamroll through their entire schedule. And maybe we'll look at Oregon and say that on January 20th, if they win the national championship, and we'll just say, well, they beat Ohio State 3 times and they won the national championship. But like, I think I can get behind that. I still think it's like maybe it's the spicy nug without the ghost pepper sauce.
Yeah.
Because we don't know how the end result. So it's probably a hot take, but it's also not like as hot as it could be.
Yeah. I mean, like, look, when do you want to be making big changes? After the season or in the season when you still have a chance to win it all? Like the last seasons, it was hey man, like we got to figure out what is going on with the defense, or like what is going on with the offense after the Michigan game. Last year it was the offense. Year before that it was the defense. You can even argue that last year was also the defense not getting a stop earlier on that final drive that Michigan had. And then, you know, like after the Mizzou game and the bowl game, it's like, what happened to the offensive line? What is going on? Carson Hinsman, that whole situation. You know, like if you're going to have a what is going on moment, like it's probably better to have it in week 7 of a potential 16, 17 game season. I mean, Jeremiah Smith said it the other day, like, oh, you'll see what's coming in the next 7, 8 games. Like this season is so long. I don't even think we're prepared for it. This is going to go into, if they go as far as they want to go, it's going to go into late January, which is ridiculous. I mean, I know it's just one more game than Michigan played last year, but even that one more game is different. Like if Georgia had gotten into the playoff last year and they had to play Michigan, how would that have gone? You know, like, I don't know. It probably would have been a really good game. And so with this expanded playoff and the structure of it and the timeline, I'm going to be surprised if we see an undefeated team win the whole thing, like in the next 2 to 3 years. Like that would surprise me.
Yeah. And again, if it's Oregon, then we'll tip our hats to the Ducks, and Ohio State will have to live with back-to-back Big Ten champions without it being them.
But even they could lose to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. And that could be their loss, right? Like, you know, there's so much at play there. You got to win so many games.
Yeah, Ohio State needs to beat Northwestern this week, though. Any closing thoughts? I don't even know if there's any game. Well, there's a couple games worth picking. Any closing thoughts on Ohio State Northwestern this week? Wait, there's a lot of non-Northwestern talk in here mixed with some Northwestern talk. Do you have anything? I've got one closing thought that I wanted to get out into the ether, but if you have anything, I'll let you do the honors.
Yeah, I mean, we're just going to have a lot of ridiculous baseball puns. So Travion Henderson was saying he is terrible at baseball, said that he was in a batting cage, I think, last year, and did not go well, just was not hitting anything. And I think it's funny because he's probably one of the biggest home run hitters on this team as far as football goes and busting out big plays. So that would be ironic if he busts out like a 60-yard touchdown run or something. But yeah, I'm just excited to get there. I think, there's been a lot of talk today and on social media, maybe this week, just about like player safety in games like this. I've covered a couple of games at baseball stadiums, one at Fenway Park, one at Yankee Stadium. There really has not been any kind of like terrible, catastrophic injury because of the sod or, the boundary or whatever. I think Wrigley Field has done a lot since 2010 when that was a catastrophe. Illinois had to play Northwestern and they had to go on just one end zone because the other one quite literally wouldn't work. So I don't know. I mean, there's always injury risk. I think that has not really been a concern of mine. I mean, if something happens, that's unfortunate, but I'm just excited to get there and to see the atmosphere.
So my closing thought is actually in that same vein. The only thing I worry about with this entire game, I'm not worried about the sideline and how I'm curious, but not worried about the back of the end zone with the ivy and the wall being right there. But they play baseball on it every single day for 81 days. Like, guys aren't just barreling into that brick wall. And then the one corner, it's really close to the third base line, the Bartman line, as I call it. Again, not worried. It's just I'm just curious. Like, do they avoid that like the plague when they're running into that end zone? The only thing that I am wondering is last year there were plenty of stoppages of gameplay. Only on the one part of the field where the turf was or the sod was laid down over the infield, because they keep the infield nice the entire year. They just lay sod over it and stitch it in. Well, the sod was like you would step and cut and it would create a big divot. I know you don't play golf, but it would create like a 56-degree wedge divot in the fairway right at like the 21-yard line. And like, you can't have that. And if somebody tries to cut and that divot slides out from under them, that's the only injury concern I have. Again, I'm not worried about the brick wall. I'm not worried about the end zone. That's the only one that I'm concerned about. And I think it's my final thing here is I guess it's a very good thing that Ohio State is going to get a look at it tomorrow, just so they're aware of like, okay, this is where the soft turf is. This is where, you know what I mean? Like, this is where the output is. I think that's probably a good thing. Just to have it in your head, like, okay, like I'm good here. Like, we don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a huge reason why they're going. Like, probably more than the figuring out the halftime procedure. I'm sure that's also a factor, but like, I'm sure that the field is more of what they're worried about more than the boundaries. Like, I think that like what kind of cleats are you wearing is probably a topic and something they're going to figure out with their equipment team. So hopefully no one gets hurt, both sides, but I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it.
My Bobcats already got a win, Andy, this week. Action complete. Bobcats win. I'm just chilling. If they win out, they go to the MAC championship. Very excited. Still haven't won one since 1968. Is Boston College going to win this week?
Have the quarterback changed to Grayson James? SMU
attorney at law, Grayson James.
Yeah, I don't think they're winning that one. They got some problems. They got to figure out what they're doing long term because that offense has not looked good.
No, it has not. I think for the record, I think Clemson is going to destroy Pitt. I think Florida is going to beat LSU. Yes, I said it. Florida, I think, is going to beat LSU. Nebraska USC is just ugly, nasty work. Mizzou, South Carolina is like the mid-off. I'm not really I don't really understand why either of those teams have numbers beside their name, especially Missouri. I think Missouri is ass. I'm sorry. I think Missouri is not good, like at all. Like at all. I'm sorry. That's my true feelings coming out. And
What about
then,
Tennessee, Georgia? Who do you have in that one?
yeah, I mean, do you have any thoughts on those games while I concoct an opinion on Tennessee, Georgia?
I mean, you basically just called a bunch of teams mid and not very good.
I'm so over the SEC this year, man.
Yeah, I mean, I I don't I'm kind of in the middle of this argument. Like I don't think it's as bad as some Big Ten people think, and I don't think it's nearly as good as a lot of SEC people think. I do think that they're dangerous playoff teams. They're kind of like the teams in the NFL, that team you wouldn't want to face. You know, it's like
Yeah.
if they got into the playoff, like it's LSU, right? Like if they stumbled into the playoffs somehow, I wouldn't want to face them if I was Ohio State. You know,
Yeah.
because they present matchup issues at really important positions. I mean, even quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier is pretty good. Like he's probably going to be top 3, top 4 quarterback off the draft board in this coming draft. So, yeah, that's where I kind of say on the SEC. Georgia, Tennessee. I feel like Georgia's because I have no faith in this Tennessee offense, which is so weird because that's what Heupel's kind of hung his hat on. But they've yet to hit the 30-point mark in any SEC game this year. They scored a combined 191 points the first 3 games of the season. And then since then, it's just been like dropping and dropping and dropping as far as their scoring average goes. So even as bad as Carson Beck has been, and really like the Georgia defense not being the Georgia defense, I still have Georgia winning that game.
Yeah, I think it would be good for everybody if Georgia blows them out. That way we don't have to really worry about Tennessee in the playoff anymore. And then Georgia either losing to Georgia Tech or losing in the conference championship game and getting a third loss. And then we don't have to worry about them either anymore. Because like these teams are not, I get it. The helmet says that they're really, really, really good. They're not. Georgia has struggled against really like bad teams. Georgia struggled with Mississippi State. They struggled with Kentucky. They got their butts kicked by Alabama and then had a miraculous comeback when Alabama took its foot off the gas.
I think the argument is like if you pit Georgia against Penn State, what happens?
I don't care though. At some point, we have
That
to
is the
care about
playoff.
the schedule that's in front of it.
That is the playoff. So I understand the argument.
Yeah.
But you know.
Hey, if you're still watching at the 47-minute mark, let us know in the comments if you would like us to do one of these Tuesdays. We're not going to do every Tuesday, but if you would like us to do a Tuesday reaction to the rankings video, let us know in the comments. We'll try to set one of them up in the next couple of weeks. We are definitely not doing them every week because the rankings just don't change enough, especially from Ohio State's point of view. But if you want to hear us talk about, Army and Missouri's resume against each other, I mean, I'll talk ball. I'm kind of signing Andy up for it, but if you want that, let us know in the comments and like the video below. I think Georgia is going to win that game by a lot. And then last one from me, I am very, very intrigued by Kansas BYU because BYU has just been skating by, barely winning games. Kansas is finally playing like decent ball after struggling at the beginning of the year, had some bad luck in one-score games. And now they're playing better. And like, BYU, are you up for this? Because Kansas is going to score points. And I know it's Provo at night, and that place is like a house of horrors for anyone not named BYU. Because once they start drinking milk in Provo, you get lost in the sauce on the milk in Provo. Anything can happen. But I'm intrigued by that game because if Kansas wins that game, BYU's done. Like even if they, unless they won the conference, like.
Yeah, well, that opens the door even more for Colorado, which, that we didn't talk about that, but Colorado, Utah. I mean, Utah's had such a disappointing season. Colorado's pretty much exceeded everyone's expectations outside of Deion Sanders, and that's super intriguing. Like, Colorado's 5-1 in the Big 12. They're legitimately in the running here for the college football playoff. And the other one I'd mention before we get out of here is just, Texas, Arkansas. I think Texas will handle them, but Arkansas did upset Tennessee earlier this year. They took Oklahoma State, which has turned out not to be a very good team, but they did take them at the time. a ranked foe in Oklahoma State to double overtime. They have a little bit of upset magic in them. I don't know if it's going to happen. I wouldn't predict it, but I do think it's a matchup kind of tag as something to watch on Saturday.
I've been reading a lot this week about this 1969 Texas-Arkansas game because Texas won 15-14, and President Nixon was there, and he said whichever team won that game was the number one team in America for the 100th season of college football. Texas won by 1. That's an old Southwest Conference rivalry game. If you haven't read about that, go read about it because I obviously wasn't alive. But, like, that's awesome. Like, that is, like, American college football. Like, the president's there, and he's going to declare the winner of that game the national champion. Like, how cool, how hilarious. I mean, old school college football
shouldn't be the system, but, like, it's a cool history.
It's hilarious that that's what college football used to be. And now it's like, hey, is this 3-loss team good enough to play in the college football playoff? And it's like, well, here, how about we bring the president in and let him declare who the national championship is? Like,
honestly, with how arbitrary the committee is, like, I guess we haven't made it that far. So,
oh man,
yeah.
But I just think like that's like old school like 60s college football at its finest. So like if you haven't read about that, like go do a history lesson. Really cool stuff. The Texas-Arkansas rivalry is reunited. Arkansas might win that game too. I'm just intrigued. So
cool that the rivalry is resumed now that Texas is in the SEC.
All right, let's get out of here. People are done hearing us talk about dead presidents and old college football. And Ohio State Northwestern. Ohio State plays Northwestern on Saturday in the friendly confines of Wrigley Field. That's about as historic as it gets, Wrigley Field and college football. Lettermen Row will be there every step of the way. We're there for the Buckeyes every step of the way. Andy Backstrom on the other side of that screen. Tim May, the 41-year vet, he's going to be up and at him on Saturday morning covering that team. He's going to be over in Chicago tomorrow at Wrigley Field as well, getting a little insight into what that thing's going to look like. Like the video below, subscribe to the YouTube channel, go to lettermenrow.com, get all of this Ohio State coverage that we do every single day, 365 days a year, and especially on Saturdays when the Buckeyes kick off this week against Northwestern. We'll see you guys at Wrigley Field on Saturday, and we'll see you over at lettermenrow.com.